Hey friends, my name is Steve Guttenberg. This is the Audiophiliac Daily Show. You know, I started out as a child, like most of us, but a child, a very curious child, a child obsessed with sound. My parents' jukebox with big woofers, and I would just listen to that sound roll over me, and I loved my little 6-transistor AM radio that I held up to my ear and listened to static between stations. It was the sound, it was the music, but it was always the sound of it. It didn't have to even be music, just sounds all around me were fascinating to me and always have been. And like Brian Eno once said in an interview, when he first heard Elvis Presley, he liked the music, but he liked the sound of it. He liked the reverb. He said, well, how does that happen? Where does that come from? Me and Eno, yeah, we were on the same wavelength. He went further. But yeah, a sound-obsessed child, kid, and certainly now, I am still a sound-obsessed person. And in the 50s, I am a child of the 50s, as you might have noticed. Yeah, Chuck Berry was huge for me. But it wasn't until 1964 when the Beatles arrived. And that changed everything. That changed the world. That changed the world, changed me and my relationship to music, because it felt new, it felt fresh. It was like the beginning of something. For them, for their journey as John, Paul, George, and Ringo, but also it seemed like everybody was along for the ride. And meet the Beatles. So this episode of the Audiophiliac Daily Show is about my musical / sound journey. And yeah, so the Beatles, meet the Beatles, because I didn't hear the UK version of their first album. I heard the American one. So I loved all the Beatles albums, but Meet the Beatles is important because it's the beginning, right? And that was followed not long after by the Rolling Stones' first album. And you know, the Stones and the Beatles, for me, they're always forever linked. And the Beatles had the fortune, so to speak, of breaking up early and just having this incredible body of work. And the Rolling Stones, if they had broken up in 1970, I would be equally enthusiastic about their body of work. But for me, those really early Rolling Stones albums were the ones, because they were such a great band. They were the bad boys, but they were so great. And their talent, at least in my book, dissipated over the decades. And I don't mean recent decades, I mean the 70s and 80s, and less so for me. But in the beginning, there was the Beatles and the Stones. A little gap there, and we jump ahead to 67, and then there's Jimi Hendrix, Are You Experienced? Another massive sea change, because it was about even more about sound. It was about guitar feedback, distortion, just pure sound, not notes and melodies and rhythms, just the sound of it. Now, yeah, you could say Link Wray did that with Rumble years earlier, but Jimmy he did it. He had this magic. And then a little bit, then we jump ahead to Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. Equally just earth-moving, shattering my perceptions of what was possible in rock music. Because Jimmy Page wasn't just a great guitarist, he was a producer. He crafted that sound of those records. And they made everybody else, the Beatles and the Stones, and even Jimi Hendrix, sound small compared to Led Zeppelin 1 and 2. And because they were so important to me, every new piece of audio I bought in that late 60s, early 70s, I brought Led Zeppelin 1 and 2 with me to the store, brick and mortar stores, to demo my new speakers or amplifier or whatever, because they were the bedrock, those two albums, 1 and 2. So in this same time period, roughly, James Brown was another biggie for me, because James Brown's sound was so deep. His talents were so incredible. He could do ballads, he could do soul, he could do R&B, he could do jazz, and just do it with this intensity that just blasted through the speaker. Just incredible. what did I mean? And he went on and he did other things, and he did funk, and he evolved as the years went by. But those early records that I heard on black radio stations in New York, like WWRL, he wasn't being played on mainstream radio. But it's a man's world. Wow. A whole new kind of blues. Oh my God. So then, you know, also going on a little bit into the 60s there is Motown and Stax. Motown just made black music mainstream popular music, and with hooks and great musicians and great talents and great songwriting from this small label, independent label coming out of Detroit that just became a worldwide phenomenon. Stax was up there too, but I was more, certainly in those days in the 60s, I was way more into Motown than Stax. I wasn't yet fully aware of what Stax was going to bring to the party. But Otis Redding, jumping ahead again, Otis Redding spoke to me. Oh, that first record that I bought, Dictionary of Soul. Yeah, his voice. He had the voice. It's so sad he died so young. Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited. I admit, I was unaware of Bob Dylan really as a performer and a musician until Highway 61. And when I heard Highway 61 and Like a Rolling Stone, again, everything changed. His way of doing electric music was electrifying. He just changed it. Now, his words, though, he was a poet. He like Chuck Berry. If there wasn't a Chuck Berry, there probably wouldn't have been a Bob Dylan. But Bob Dylan, his words, his intensity was just off the charts, and he destroyed the competition. He was not a band. He was a single human being who had that power. And the sound of that record, Highway 61, yeah, just this frantic, like, I got to get all this out energy, just erupting out of Bob Dylan. And everything in his wake was just disappearing because Bob was just owning it. He was the man. So yeah, then there's Thelonious Monk. Now, I immediately got Monk. It wasn't difficult. It wasn't weird. It was right. I was right in tune with Monk. I didn't understand it, but I knew that I loved it. And every single day when I would come home from school and on weekends, I would play that album all the way through, both sides. And it just, his music, his rhythm, his harmonic language just was another world to me. And that's how I got into jazz. And that's also led to Mingus. But Mingus, I liked Mingus, like but that was probably a little bit later. But Monk remains for me the bedrock of all of my jazz experiences. It all comes from Thelonious Monk. I want to talk a little bit about John Mayall. Now, John Mayall is a British blues musician, but he was, I think, 6, 7, 8 years older than all the other guys, the Beatles and the Stones and everything. And he was sort of a founding father of blues in England. And I liked John Mayall and the Blues Breakers, but the record that really connected for me was John Mayall at Fillmore East. It's called Turning Point. And it was an unplugged record. It was probably he was the first to turn away from electric music and just do a purely acoustic live concert. And it's a great sounding record. It's really the sound of that concert venue, Fillmore East. I think it captures the sound of that space better than any other record I've heard that was recorded there. So yeah, that was a big one for me. I also like Neil Young's Live at Fillmore East because he's peaking there. He's a Cinnamon Girl and his hits at the time, Cowgirls in the Sand, but it's got that electricity. He's like on fire. He's bursting through the speakers. He is one of the few rock musicians who keeps at it, new music, one album after another. They're not all 5 stars or anything, but he keeps plugging away. Then there's Duke Ellington. Now, I love Duke Ellington, and there's so many great Duke Ellington records. It's hard to pick one, but I'll pick Blues in Orbit. It was recorded at the Columbia 30th Street studio. It was a former church, big space, great sound, You don't need to add reverb when you record there. It's just the room itself is the reverb. Great sound. And that leads me to West Side Story, the score for the Broadway show. And there's also a West Side Story for the movie, but I prefer the sound and the performances on the Broadway version. Just incredible. It was recorded in one day at Columbia 30th Street. Big production, orchestra, singers, all kinds of stuff going on. And they just knocked that out. And wow, what a great sounding recording. And speaking of Broadway, now I'm really not a Broadway guy, but I'm just going to throw in the score for Hair, the musical, the Broadway musical. Now the thing is, before it was on Broadway, it was off Broadway, and there's two different versions of this music, and I think they're both good. And they're usually sold together now as one thing: the off-Broadway Hair and the Broadway Hair, and they're just a capsule of that time, a time capsule of 1960s hippiness and peace and love and all that stuff. And it's interesting that when it was actually happening in the 60s, I was completely unaware of it. I didn't want to. I wasn't on my radar to go see a Broadway show or even an off-Broadway show. Well, then we should talk. Then I got to talk about Pink Floyd. Now, for me, Pink Floyd is more of the 1960s, early 1970s Pink Floyd, the experimental Pink Floyd, the crazy, psychedelic, ambient, weird Pink Floyd. Once Dark Side of the Moon arrives, I was less interested. I like Dark Side of the Moon, and I like some of the later stuff, but really it's these early years. And there's all these compilations now that have come out, and this one I'm showing you now called The Early Years Creation, and it has Interstellar Overdrive and Careful with That Axe Eugene and that sort of stuff. And it's amazing to me. It's so unique. They weren't copying anybody else. They weren't trying to be the Beatles. They just had this sound, get back to sound. Pink Floyd, especially in the early days, were really sound explorers. In the early days, they were into crafting soundscapes. They were sort of Eno before there was Eno. Which leads me to Eno. Now, Eno, again, mega, mega, mega for me. When I first heard Here Come the Warm Jets, Another Green World, Before and After Science, I said, who is this guy? You know, I was unaware of that he was in Roxy Music earlier. But again, his sound is so processed, but in the best possible way. It's so layered, it's so dense, it's so deep, and ambient albums like On Land or Apollo, they still fascinate me. And how he did this in a pure analog universe where he didn't have the tools that we have now to just do these manipulations and create density and atmosphere. Amazing stuff. Next up is Tom Waits' Mule Variations. Now, I like a lot of Tom Waits records. And this is another one, I just picked one. But he is very much aware of the sound of his records and the way he manipulates his voice, and just there's a rawness to it. And an incredible, incredible songwriter. It's, you know, which will lead to another record right away, but his words, his lyrics, his voice, his presentation, really interesting man. Just the complete package. So the other Tom Waits reference is to Holly Cole's record Temptation, where she covers Tom Waits songs. And the thing is, when I first heard this record, I really didn't like it because I thought she's you know, slaughtering these songs. There's not enough Tom Waits in them. But over time I got to realize, no, that's the idea. She's just making them her own. And I love her interpretations. They're jazzier, she's sexy, the sound is really, really good. I listen to that record constantly. It just blows me away. As much as I like Tom, I think her versions of a lot of his songs are actually better than Tom's versions. But anyway, Tom has just got this, you know, massive back catalog of stuff to get into. So if you've never heard of Tom Waits, well, you could start with Mule Variations and explore from there. I spoke earlier about Motown, my love, love, love of Motown music. But the Standing in the Shadows of Motown, which is a documentary about the label, there's some tracks on the deluxe version of just the instrumentals of a lot of classic Motown songs before the vocals were added. Because never did live vocals on Motown records. So they have these instrumentals for you to hear, and when you hear their music, when you hear Motown music without vocals, you just get deeper and deeper into the music, and these incredible musicians and these incredible arrangements. It just is so much energy and hooks and talent on display. It's staggering. And if you haven't seen that movie, by the way, Standing in the Shadows of Motown, and you're a fan of soul, R&B, whatever you want to call it, you must see that movie. It's one of the best music documentaries of all time. So the Rolling Stones Jammin' with Edward is basically just the Stones messing around in a studio. I think they're waiting for Keith Richards, and they're just messing around. And it's so beautiful, and it sounds really good. It's not like they were making a recording. It's just like capturing rolling tape while they were messing around. And so it's not filled with songs. It's just sort of things that trail off and stuff. But it's one of those you are there moments. And if you're a Stones fan and you've never heard Jammin' with Edward, check that out. You will be amazed to hear this other side of their music. Now, I didn't mention The Who earlier when I was talking about 60s British invasion music, but The Who live at Leeds. For me, that is the best live rock recording, concert recording of all time, because they are at their peak. They are just killing it. It's like a riot is going on stage, but it's so beautiful. It's so intense. It is so of that time of this band exploding, just charged with energy, and the audience is 100% there. Now they had released Tommy at this point, so the album has a lot of Tommy stuff, but the pre-Tommy music is in there too, and it's just amazing. They were a much better live band than they were a studio band. I never really got the studio version of Tommy, but there's some live versions like this one I think are incredible. Then I have to tell you about television. The first television record, late 1970s, it's Tom Verlaine's band. It is intense, it's dark, it's poetry, it's about drugs, it's about depression, it's about rage, it's about anger, but it's beautiful. His guitar is amazing, the band is amazing. It's kind of like the Velvet Underground parallel in a way. They didn't last that long. I mean, they went on, they broke up after 2 albums, and they got back together. It's one of those things. But it's really this first record that's the one. And the Sirens are a perfect accompaniment to talking about television. Now, as for experimental music, which I am drawn to, the Residents, they were unlike anything else. They were performance artists that made records. Most of the time, I don't think the members of the band were known, or even how many people were in the Residents at any given time. They performed with eyeballs, these big, gigantic eyeballs over their heads. You never actually saw them in concert or on records. And this particular album, Eskimo, which is the super deluxe version that has outtakes and really cool stuff, is a great way in if you're into odd, unsettling, moody, strange. If you're into strange and you like this record, there's a deep well of Eskimo, of Residents music out there. So this one's too easy in a way, but Lou Reed, Transformer, Walk on the Wild Side, but the whole record, produced by David Bowie, again, a piece of New York. He came from, obviously, the Velvet Underground. And by the way, the Velvet Underground live at the Matrix, which was a really bad bootleg for years, but then there were board mixes found, and it captures really early Velvet Underground, and it is great, really, really good. But his solo record, Transformer, is, first of all, it sounds really good. I was always fascinated by the bass line and Walk on the Wild Side, and it has a mood. It's an atmosphere. It's a piece. It is an album that really demands to be listened to as an album. I'm talking about Transformer. Then there's Radiohead. Now, I came late to Radiohead. I really didn't get on board till Kid A and Amnesiac. But talk about sound explorers and just it's very sound-directed, atmosphere, weirdness, great musicianship, great lyrics. I am a fan, but especially of those two records, Kid A, Amnesiac. Then there's Lucinda Williams. I love her voice, I love her art, her music, her lyrics, but Car Wheels on a Gravel Road was her breakthrough record, well-deserved breakthrough record, because she has angst. It's so, I just feel totally connected to her songs and to her feelings. She's so great at that kind of connection, of emotional, you're right there with her, you're feeling what she's feeling, and great, really amazing. But that's just the one I'm picking because it's the most well-known, but it's also the most well-known because it is a phenomenal album. So I'm going to finish up. I could go on, obviously. I could go on for hours at a time, but I don't want to bore you guys. But I'm going to finish up with Cosmo Sheldrake. Now, I just recently found Cosmo, and he's a young guy in the UK, and he's obsessed with birds. And he made this album called Wake Up Call, and it's sounds of birds, and he's playing minimalist electronic music that's not mimicking the birds, but accompanying the birds, these recordings of birds. And when you go to his website, you can actually see videos he made of him going into a forest with a keyboard and just hearing the birds all around him and sort of jamming with the birds. But he is really something. Unfortunately, most of his music isn't available in physical form. This one, Wake Up Call, is a limited edition of 500 LPs. It's not sold as a CD, though you can stream it on Tidal and Qobuz. And I highly recommend checking it out because, again, he's doing this thing of not just making, he's not ordinary. You feel that connection to birds. I'm not particularly a bird guy, but I do like hearing birds all around, but he takes it to another level. So this one, Wake Up Calls and Galapagos, those records are amazing achievements for sound, for music, and for anybody who wants to break out and find new things. That's what this list was really all about. So if you've gotten this far in this demo, thank you. Thank you for lasting, and I really do appreciate it. And of course, I want to hear what you guys love and music that changed your lives. What did it for you? You know, put them in the comments, sort of where you started, how you evolved, where you are now. I think that's, we audiophiles don't talk about that enough. You know, yes, I know it's about the gear, but it's also about the music and how the music gets to you. And that's what this gear is really for. That's what it's all about. So I think my work here is at last complete. Oh, but wait, there's more. I have these free samplers from Chesky Records and MA Recording, and they are audiophile recordings of music that is great music, but it's also not dynamically compressed, and it's not EQ'd or processed. It's just purely great sound. And I will link to the videos about those albums directly below, and then you can get to their websites and download the music for free. Oh, so now I can say, well, thank you for watching the Audiophiliac Daily Show. And if you really like it, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. If you have already subscribed, thank you so much for doing that. You should also check out my Patreon at patreon.com/audiophiliac. But while you're here, you could check out the playlist. There's playlists for music reviews and speaker reviews and electronics reviews and headphone reviews, plus interviews, lots and lots of interviews. Unfortunately, no interviews with musicians, but someday that's going to happen. So again, thank you again for watching, and I really, really do hope to see you back here again very, very soon. Bye-bye.